Hello everyone, my name is Joshua and welcome to Northern Solar. It's time to look back at our facts and figures for August 2023 for our solar panels here in Cheshire and look at what we've produced, what we've saved, how much money we've saved doing that, and answering the question, are solar panels worth it? So without further ado, let's jump into the presentation. So for those of you that are new to the channel, this is our solar array here on our house in Cheshire. We have got 8 kilowatt of SolarEdge array with a 6 kilowatt SolarEdge inverter and a 13 kilowatt hour Growatt battery storage. So as you can see here, this is the front of the house. We've got 4 kilowatt on there, which is 10 panels, and the same on the back, 4 kilowatt, again 10 panels. Our house faces east-west, so we have panels on both sides to take advantage of the sun all day long. So this is the production graph for August 2023. As I mentioned, it's been a pretty terrible month in terms of solar generation. It started fairly well the first couple of first sort of part of the month. We were averaging around 30ish, a couple of really good days there, and it soon changed and the weather got a lot worse and we were seeing some really low days, a couple of half decent days, but on the whole, after like the 10th, 11th here, you can see it was pretty poor in terms of solar days. So our highest day here was on the 10th, which was 41.1 kilowatt hours, and the lowest, I think, was the 23rd, which was just 12.7 kilowatt hours. So that's a total of 749 kilowatt hours of generation at an average of 24.2. So if we look on the next slide, this is compared to August 2022, so that's last year. You can see last year's generation is the blue and this year's generation is the green. So we were doing pretty well. April wasn't quite as good, but May and June were well above 2022. Then July, as we saw in last month's video, was pretty terrible compared to July 2022. And August this year has been even worse in comparison to 2022. As you can see, last August we were really high at 958 kilowatt hours at an average of 30.9. And yeah, like I said in the previous slide, this year August is only 749 at an average of 24.2. So it's 22% less generation. So what we're going to look into is what does that mean for us? How do we do in terms of what we were able to utilise and how much money it saved us compared to what we generated last year, which was obviously a lot more. So this graph comes from our Octopus account. It tallies up each day what you've used from the grid and what you exported to the grid. So here's our grid import across the whole month of August. And as you can see, it's pretty low most days. We've got a few days here where I've charged the electric car at home. I'll go more into our electric car later on in the presentation. But here it's generally pretty low. What we've started doing is using the overnight period to top up the hot water if we've not had enough hot water during the day, or if we've used it in the evening, then we let the machine wait till the overnight period and then top up during that cheaper time on our tariff. And I'll go more into the tariff details as well shortly. But as you can see, we've had some really good, strong exports, even without a huge generation. We're still doing pretty well with the exports. 466 kilowatt hours exported to the grid compared to just 146 kilowatt hours imported. Most of that was actually for charging the car. So the house usage is pretty low, which is pretty normal for us if you've been watching the channel for any length of time. But the grid exports here every day, other than one day where we had a pretty terrible day and we didn't get the battery fully charged, so we didn't export anything out to the grid. Every other day we're exporting at least something which we get paid for from the energy provider. So what I like to do in these videos is pick a day of the month and go through how that looked in terms of generation and then consumption patterns and things. So I picked the 5th of August. That was a Saturday, I think, in 5th of August. So you can see generation starting maybe around 7 AM, pretty low, quite a cloudy start to the day, and then it did pick up. I think there was still some high cloud around, but we were getting to around 3 kilowatts when it was the brighter parts of the day around lunchtime. So you can see getting quite a good generation there, cloudier again in the afternoon and tailing away towards the evening, and by about 8:30 generation finishes. So yeah, given that August wasn't very good, this was a pretty typical day. We had a pretty good start to the month where we had maybe a few days where we got really good early generation and a higher peak like this, and then coming down more gently to the afternoon. But this was probably a typical day, not very good, quite a lot of cloud around. So this is how we can look back at the sort of what we used the energy on and how it was consumed in the house. So the green box, the bar in the background, is the percentage charge of the battery. So overnight the battery is just ticking away, powering the house, and then we have this off-peak window for 3 hours where we have cheap electricity from the Octopus account, and you can see here there's a short period where the immersion heater clicks in and tops up the hot water just to make sure we've got enough hot water for the morning. Battery keeps going, ticking away. You can see very little amount of consumption needed in the property, and then at some time in the morning I think we must have put something in the oven, or I can't remember what this was, we were cooking maybe, and so you can see here that there's a drawer on the house, there's consumption in the house, so you can see the battery discharging to meet that load, and then as the sun comes up the battery starts to charge again. And you can see this wavy pattern here is the pattern from the previous graph with the solar generation during the day. And as you can see, the battery steadily ticks up because the consumption in the house is really low. So battery's ticking all the way up, and as it gets closer here we've had a few, when you can see here the sun goes in this patch, there's not as much generation, so the battery doesn't charge as quickly. And then again, just sun comes out, charges the battery, and we get to 100%. Now we have a device for our hot water heating called the MyEnergy Eddie, which I'll go into a bit more later, but essentially what happens is once the battery is full, if there's any excess solar at that point, it starts to heat hot water, and you can see that here, the consumption in the house is starting to marry up with the generation that we have from the solar. So as we're generating more solar, that's being used by the house, because the battery can, as it gets very full, charges at a slower rate, so there's excess solar. It's not all going into the battery when it's at that sort of 90-95%. It can only charge at a slower rate in that zone. So you can see here the consumption starts to follow the path of the generation. So every time the generation goes up, the consumption goes up, which is the heater warming the hot water tank that we have. So then what you see here is the battery is full, so and the solar is still shining, so we get a lot of heat going into the tank. And then what happens at 4 o'clock is the next period of the tariff opens, which means that we get paid extra to export during that time. So then with the battery switches over to start discharging out to the grid, whether or not we need it in the house or not. So that way we get paid extra during that 3 hour window from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the evening. So that's what this is here. The battery is discharging all the way down to 50%. And I tell it to stop at 50% because I want to make sure we've got enough battery power to last through the evening without having to go back to the grid at that point. So all of this is exporting to the grid, and you can see there's still quite a bit of solar, so it's going up and down as the more solar we get at this time, the more export to the grid on top of what we're exporting from the battery. And obviously the house consumption is pretty low still at this point. And then yeah, I think we must have been out for dinner in the evening because you can't see any more spikes in the consumption, so it must have been out for dinner on the 5th. But yeah, generally low consumption for the rest of the evening, and the battery takes care of all that. So yeah, that's a pretty typical day in terms of how the battery looks. You can see the battery does get to full, but it's not full for very long. That's because we're getting shorter days, and the less sunny days mean the battery takes longer to charge. If it was really sunny all day, we may have seen the battery full from maybe 1-2 o'clock in the afternoon, which would just meant more export to the grid at that time, which you do get paid for, but it's not as lucrative as this window here where we try and maximise what we're making from it. So the thing that everybody waits for on this video is the financials and all the figures that go with it. So as I mentioned earlier, we had 749 kilowatt hours of solar production, and according to Octopus we exported 466 kilowatts of those to the grid. And that's split into these 5 regions that I've split out on the tariff that we have. So we have a night period and then this flux period from 2 o'clock till 5 o'clock where we generally are importing them because it's cheaper in that time, not exporting. So during the day we've exported 189 in total for the month. And then what we see here is that peak period from 4 till 7 p.m. we've exported 277. And that's where we generally have been sort of making our money, is by exporting from the battery out to the grid during that period. And as you can see here again, in the evening we're not exporting anything out after about 7 o'clock. So what we look at here is our total exports to grid 466, but it's mostly in that peak period to make the most of the tariff that we're currently on. So grid consumption, so self-consumption first. So what that means, if we've generated 749 and exported 466, the remainder of that is what we've consumed in the house from the solar at the time. And then we also have our grid consumption, and as you can see, 146 kilowatt hours of grid consumption for the month of August. and almost all of that is during this flux period overnight from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. and that's where it's much cheaper for us to buy electricity from the grid. The rest of the day, you're not really bringing in very much till 1, 2, and then occasionally maybe a little bit during the day if we're using more in the house than the battery or the solar can give us, then we do have to go back to the grid a little bit, but it's minimal amount that we're using during those times. So you can see the vast majority of our grid consumption comes during that off-peak period overnight. And again, like I mentioned earlier, most of that is actually charging our EV. So our total consumption in the house is the grid consumption at our solar consumption, so that's 429 kilowatt hours. So as you can see, we're generating a lot more at 749 than we are consuming. So even when it's a very dull, sunny, less sunless month almost in August, we're still able to generate more than we're consuming in the property. So you can see here our grid consumption, if I tally these up as peak and off-peak, off-peak was 139, and then the other times, which I would call peak, are 8 kilowatt hours. So a very low percentage of our total consumption comes from the grid during those times. So comparing the financials, I have this sort of assumption set which gives me what I believe our electricity would have cost if we didn't have our solar. So with the solar and the tariff that we're on, our standing charge for the month was £18.65, which is about 60 pence a day, which is very high I think compared to a lot of other areas, but just where we are in Cheshire, I think it's Scottish Power Energy Network that decides what the standing charge is supposed to be, I believe, but it's pretty high on this tariff anyway. So yeah, our cost for the grid usage in the month of August was £31.74, and I believe that would have cost £87.88 if we hadn't have had the solar. So our electricity cost in total is the standing charge plus the grid usage, which is £50.40, and that would have been £106.53 had we not had the solar. So we managed to earn £149.42 of exports. So those 466 kilowatt hours that we exported to the grid made us £149.42. And obviously you wouldn't have made any export payments if you didn't have solar. So you can do a net electricity cost of negative £99.03 for this month. So Octopus Energy owe us £99.03 for this month. That's absolutely fantastic on a month where we haven't actually had the best sunshine. To be able to have a net bill of negative £99 is pretty amazing. If we'd had no solar, obviously our cost would have been the same as the electricity cost, so £106.53. So if you add these together, our monthly savings in terms of what we earned versus plus what we saved from having the solar would be £205.56. So yeah, considering that it's not been very sunny, saving over £200 a month compared to not having solar is pretty fantastic. And just going into the breakdown of that, you can see our export is about 62% of what we generated, and we consumed about 37% of what we generated. And then a breakdown of our consumption pattern, 66% of that came from the solar, and I do include the battery usage with that. Our usage from the battery gets counted into that solar. Off-peak grid accounted for 32%, and just 1.8% of peak time grid usage. So overall, really happy with the performance of the system that we've got in the house in terms of what we managed to generate and how we managed to use that in the house. So this is the tariff that we're on with Octopus. So this what we found has worked best for us over the summer is the standing charge is 60 pence a day, which is quite a lot, but the rates that we're able to get in terms of exporting during that peak rate, we get over 32 pence per kilowatt hour during those 3 hours that we have in the peak rate, which is pretty fantastic. During the day it's a standard at 20 pence, or just over 20 pence per kilowatt hour. And then the other side of that is when we're importing overnight, we're only paying 18.6766 pence per kilowatt hour to import from the grid, compared to it's 31p during the day or 43.5p during that peak rate time. So if we avoid our importing during these times, and we only import during that time, we're getting the lowest cost electricity we can get, whilst also making the most of the export payments that are available on this tariff. So this might be hard to read on the screen, there's quite a lot of numbers on here, but this is essentially every month summarised together since we've had the system installed since April 2022, all the way through to this month in August 2023. So our total generation is 11,228 kilowatt hours since we've had the system installed, which is pretty amazing. And we've exported 66,428 of those. This breakdown here shows the different solar consumptions like we were talking about before for August, but just sums them all up. And I like this number here, 9,765. We've consumed on average less than what we've generated, so it feels like on average we are consuming less than we're generating in the house, which feels like we're adding a benefit to the system overall. And then obviously the financials at the bottom, if you add up every month's savings that we've calculated, we are currently at £2,646.78 of savings. Just wanted to do a quick comparison with August 2022. Like we looked at the generation earlier, this graph shows how much difference the tariff that you're on can make with solar and batteries and that sort of thing, because back in August 2022 we generated 1,020, I think. Oh, well, that might be wrong because I thought it was 958. But anyway, we generated a lot less this month, around say 27% less. I think it was 22%. I must have got the wrong numbers in here. Exported less. We did consume less. Obviously, because we generated less, we consumed a lot more from the grid. So we generated less. We exported less. We bought more from the grid. But if you look at the savings were a lot higher, and it's all down to the tariff. Even though the standing charge is higher, and our cost for our grid usage was higher because it's now more expensive overnight, and we're using more overnight to charge the electric car, the savings we're making from the exports, the money that we are able to generate as income, means that our net electricity cost is much better than it was last year, even with lower generation and higher consumption. We're saving over £50 more than we did, even though we generated more last year. So what I'm seeing with the system is the way you set it up is arguably more important than how much you generate. Having the system set up to be able to utilise what you need when you need it, and getting the tariff right, picking the right tariff that works best for your consumption patterns, is a huge factor in how much money you're going to save. Just having solar and a battery will save you money, but it's also down to what tariffs you're on and your utilisation of those tariffs. I do like to show this slide each month. It doesn't really change very much. I've calculated this based off the first full year that we did in terms of how much we're going to save and how long it's going to take to pay back. We saved £1,495 in our first year, but the system cost us just over £15,000 to have installed. So with all these savings and assumptions that we've got here, the payback period until we've made back that £15,000 is around 8 years. I do expect that to come down a little bit because we're starting to save more money now with these newer tariffs and utilising the energy better in the home. But yeah, overall, the payback period on a system like this, probably 7 years, 8 years. And then if you project further into the future, it's very hard to know what electricity is going to cost, or if the battery needs replacing in 10 years, they might have to spend some more money on getting the battery replaced. But the solar panels will generate guaranteed for 25 years, so you never know. We might get somewhere close to a cumulative savings of £93,979, but I'll keep an eye on it, and each year we'll update the assumptions based on costs and how things are doing. But one thing to note is that obviously it's based on your usage patterns. Our usage patterns have changed a lot, even since we've had the solar installed. When we first got the solar installed, we didn't have an electric car. We had a plug-in hybrid car, and now we don't have that anymore. We've got a fully electric car instead. We've got electric heated hot water, and we're on a different tariff. We utilise that tariff as best we can to generate more savings. So I do expect that the second year savings will be higher than the first year savings, which will then project as a shorter payback period. So yeah, talking about electric cars, I mentioned earlier as well, this is the Renault Zoe which we have. We've had this since January this year, and this month in August we drove 1,431 miles, at an average of 4.7 miles per kilowatt hour, which is pretty good. I think 4.7 seems quite good. I don't think there's not many cars get that sort of efficiency. I think the Zoe's one of the better ones for that sort of level of efficiency per mile. What that meant was in August, the total amount of charge that was put into the car was 282.35 kilowatt hours. I only had to put 36.45 kilowatt hours of that from the home charging, because I'm able to charge at work, which is obviously a huge perk in terms of saving money, because I put 245 kilowatt hours into the car at work and it didn't cost me a single penny. So the cost to charge the car at 36.45 kilowatt hours at home was only £7.60. So when you combine all that together, it actually works out at half of a penny per mile. And obviously that's very lucky for me to be able to charge the car at work for free. But it does mean that I was able to save even more money by having an electric car and not having to pay very much to keep it running. If we were assuming a standard petrol car, maybe 40 miles per gallon at £1.44 a litre, that should say 1,431 miles, would have cost us £234.20. So the fact that we only spent £7.60 on charging the car meant that overall in again, that should say August. Crikey, I'm making a lot of mistakes this month. That should say August there, sorry about that. £226.60 saved in August. And again, like I mentioned, it's very lucky to be able to charge the car for free at work. But even if we were charging it at home, it would have been around about, say, £50-60 to charge the car at home. So you're still saving a significant amount on fuel costs by having an electric car. And obviously electric cars are more expensive than petrol cars. This one second hand was about £15,000. So again, saving a couple of £100 a month is helping, but it's unlikely to sort of pay for itself in any reasonable amount of time. But what it is good is it's just not costing us anything month to month. So if petrol prices go up, we don't suffer from that because we're not buying petrol. And to be honest, I love driving it. It's only a small car, but I do really enjoy driving it. And it's at 4.7 miles a kilowatt hour. It's pretty efficient. So the last device we have in the property to note here is the MyEnergy Eddie. So this is our water cupboard tank. So we've got a 200 odd litre hot water tank, which is heated electrically. It is also connected to the gas heating, but we don't use the gas during the summer because there's no need. When we have the central heating on, it is set up to heat the hot water as well as the central heating. So we'll be able to, when we are using the gas, it will help us with the hot water, but for now we heat the hot water completely with electric. At the moment, this isn't actually saving us any money, and I'll go into that now in a bit more detail. What happens is when the battery is full and there's still excess solar, it turns the heater on in the tank and then heats the hot water. So all these spikes, so during the day when the battery is full and the energy then goes into the hot water heater in the tank to help us have the hot water heater during the day. So what that means is we're not exporting that energy. So during the day we were getting paid 20.1 pence to export that energy, and it only costs us 18.66 pence to buy that energy at night. So what you can assume from that is if you're not exporting it during the day and then you're buying it in the evening, you're putting it into that, you're essentially losing 1.44 pence per kilowatt hour, which is the difference between the two rates. And because we've managed to put 86.9 kilowatt hours into the hot water tank for just directly from the solar, we actually lost £1.25 by doing this. And most people would say, well, just turn it off, just heat it with gas, it's cheaper. And that is true. At the moment, gas is actually the cheapest way to heat our hot water. But we really don't want to use gas. We want to avoid using gas as much as possible because we have the solar power. We have the solar power that we've paid for, and we want to utilise that in the house as much as possible and not be as reliant on the fossil fuel burning heat boiler that we have to have for our central heating. So although it is costing us £1.25 at the moment on this tariff, when we switch over into the winter and we change the tariff, it probably will come back to being a marginal savings. But what I do like about this setup is that it does actually mean that we are utilising what we're generating, rather than putting strain on the grid or buying gas that we don't really want to buy. We're just using what we're generating in the house, and that feels like a lot better way. And it might be costing us £1.25 a month, but it just feels like a much better way of utilising and how the system works. It's there to maximise our self-sufficiency rather than save money, this particular device. So at the end of the videos, as you'll know if you've watched these before, I do a little plug for Octopus. I don't work for Octopus, but as I've been a customer for them for a long time, anyone who's an Octopus customer can refer another person and get a £50 credit for them on their bill. It does mean that I get a £50 credit on the bill we have, which is fantastic. If anyone is looking to switch to Octopus, and I would highly recommend looking at their various tariffs, if you're looking at EVs, if you're looking at solar, batteries, all that sort of thing, I believe Octopus Energy offers the best rates and the most amount of choice when it comes to those sort of tariffs. So if you are thinking of moving over to Octopus, do consider using the link in the description to get yourself £50 credit on your bill and help me with a £50 credit on my bill. And a massive thank you to those of you who have actually already clicked on the link and signed up with Octopus. It really does help, and hopefully will help us keep our bills low through the winter when there's not enough solar to power the house. So that's about it really. I'll put myself back on screen before we go. Oh, it's gone very dark here all of a sudden. I think we'll, let's see, can I get it a bit brighter? Yeah, I think the sun's abandoned us. We're expecting some thunderstorms, I think, this afternoon. But yeah, essentially, that is it for August video. I think we can answer the question, are solar panels worth it? Again, the answer is yes. Even when it's not that sunny, we've been able to generate enough to keep the house fully powered during the day, export money to the grid and export energy to the grid to make some money, and also heat hot water, charge electric car, and all of that. It's really is quite impressive that even when the weather's not great, you can still save money by having these setups. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the comments below. I do enjoy answering them. If you look back at previous videos, there's been some good conversations on what sort of equipment, what expected generation people might get and things like that. If you've got a solar system, let me know how you got on in August. Please, it'd be nice to hear some other people didn't get great results, because our results were pretty terrible in terms of generation compared to last year. Luckily, the first week of September has been pretty good so far, so maybe September will help us balance the books a little bit in terms of generation compared to last year. But other than that, thank you very much for watching, and see you next month.